So I think, obviously this is an incredibly important topic, and we only have a very short time. So I think we really want to start with setting some context and looking at the regulatory landscape. Since the advent of GDPR in 2018 now, we have seen so much regulation in the privacy space, and it's an incredibly complex regulatory landscape. We know that there has been regulation after regulation in the EU and the UK. We've seen the Digital Services Act, the Online Safety Act, Children's Code. And what we know from all of this is there are numerous age verification and age assurance requirements. Understanding and knowing your audience has become key. So I think turning to you, Katerina, and we'll start with that EU-UK regulatory landscape and where that impacts on children is particularly important. But I know there's a lot to talk about, and we need to think as well about data protection authorities across different EU member states who've produced their guidance. So maybe you can give us an overview, a whistle stop.
Exactly. Okay. Thanks, Claire. So, yes, I agree. It's important to explain the legal and regulatory background because this will help us understand how things have evolved over the past few years. I will start by saying that children's privacy is a regulatory priority at the moment for many regulators in the EU and, of course, for the ICO, the UK Data Protection Authority here in the UK. And just to clarify, when we talk about children from an EU and UK perspective, we mean individuals under the age of 18. This is how we define children in Europe and UK. From a data protection perspective, the main data protection legislation in the EU is, as I suspect you're all aware, is the GDPR. And in the UK, we have the UK version, the UK GDPR, which is pretty much the same as the EU version. The GDPR includes limited references to children's data, and it does not contain explicit obligations to carry out age assurance. However, the recitals do say that children merit specific protection with regards to their personal data, and this is because children may be less aware of the risks and the consequences of processing activities, and they may be less aware of the safeguards in place or their data protection rights. The GDPR also sets an age of digital consent. And what is this? This means that when online service providers offer services directly to children and they process their personal data in this context, and they rely on consent as a legal basis for the processing, they need to ensure that if the children are below a certain age, this age of consent, they need to have parental consent in order to go ahead with their processing activities. And just to make things a little more complex, the GDPR does not allows member states to select their own age of consent, of digital consent, through their national legislation, and it gives a threshold between 13 and 16 years. So we do see a fragmentation in this regard across different member states. And for example, in the UK, which is no longer a member of the EU, but the age of digital consent is set at 13 years. In Ireland, it's 16 years. In France, it's 15 years. So this adds another layer of complexity here. So although the GDPR does not set explicit age assurance requirements, in essence, in many cases, it will be necessary to know the age of users or to know if an organization is dealing with adults or child users in order to be able to effectively comply with the obligations, with their data protection obligations. So against this background, back in 2020, the ICO issued the age-appropriate design code, which is also known as the Children's Code. It's easier to reference it like that. So this is a set of, this includes a set of standards around children's privacy that online service providers need to meet if their services are likely to be accessed by children. And this is a very important, this is a cornerstone text in the area of children's privacy. And it was the first attempt for more detailed commentary on age assurance in connection with the GDPR. So the following up on this children's code, the ICO has been very active in this space. They have issued complementary guidance to assist organizations to meet the standards of the code. They have issued specifically an opinion on age assurance, which was updated. It was first issued in 2021, and it was updated earlier this year in January. Just very recently, about a month ago, the ICO issued a statement noting that children's privacy is a regulatory priority and explained its strategy in this regard. So in the UK, this is very much a hot topic. And the Children's Code has been an inspiration for other regulators and legislators as well. And I will briefly mention that in Ireland, the Irish Data Protection Authority, the DPC, has issued their fundamentals for a child-oriented approach to data processing. This also explains requirements with regards to children's privacy, and it's very much inspired and aligned with the ICO's Children's Code. And of course, we see activity in this area in other EU member states as well. For example, in France, the CNIL, the French authority, has issued recommendations regarding children's privacy that touch upon the topic of age assurance. In Spain, the AEPD, the Spanish authority, has also issued guidance on this topic. So I would say this is a topic, this is an area that is here to stay. So on top of all this, we are also expecting more guidance on children's privacy from the European Data Protection Board, which consists of the heads of national data protection authorities across EU member states. And although we don't have like a specific time frame. This has been, right? Yes, indeed, it's been going on for some time, so we're very much waiting for this. Apart from guidance on children's privacy and age assurance, we've also started seeing enforcement action. Very briefly, both in the UK and in Ireland, there have been enforcement decisions against TikTok on areas touching upon children's privacy, including age assurance. And I think that the decisions in this area show that age assurance is a challenging topic, not only for organizations, but also for regulators as well. So this is briefly the legal landscape from a data protection perspective. Along with the data protection framework, we also have other legislation, both in the EU and the UK, that relates to children's privacy and is relevant for age in the context of age assurance. This is mainly online safety legislation. For example, in the UK, we have the very recent Online Safety Act, which has the key objective to protect children from online harms, and it introduces explicit requirements for age assurance for certain online providers, such as social media, in specific cases to protect children from certain types of harmful content. And we have more guidance coming out in relation to this topic from Ofcom. So that organizations can understand more how to comply with these requirements. And in a similar vein, in the EU, we have the Digital Services Act, the DSA, which, although it doesn't set out explicit requirements, it does refer to age assurance in the context of very large online platforms and online search engines. And I'm conscious that this is a lot, so I will just note that even in the context of the DSA, we've started seeing some action from the European Commission just a few days ago. We had a statement from the Commission that they have opened formal investigations to assess whether Meta's activities have been in compliance with the requirements of the DSA, and among other areas they will be examining, we understand, age verification. So yes, I think that gives it's a lot to digest. So I will just pause here.
A hugely complex topic and a really important one, and I think what comes through loud and clear from all of the new regulations, and we know what to expect coming, is that age assurance, which is obviously interconnected with children's identity, that's a consistent theme. Know your audience, or you're going to have to deal with the consequences as an online service. I think very quickly we're going to turn to Denise and to try and give this a more global viewpoint. The situation in the US is incredibly complex too. We're dealing with federal and state proposed bills and passed bills that include age verification, age assurance, and so on. Denise, maybe you can give us an overview of the state of play in the US right now.
Sure. Thank you. That's a tough act to follow. The U.S. is, may have been first to the party with COPPA, but it is definitely catching up on the back end with what's been going on across the globe. There's a tsunami of new regulations. Last year, we had 144 new bills introduced in the U.S. This year, we've seen a flurry of movement again. And for the sake of time, I'll try to do a top-level overview. Many of these new regulations and proposed bills would require companies to verify the age of the online users and obtain consent, expanding the applicability of child and teen privacy to more businesses, either by lowering the knowledge standard or by raising the age of the protected users. And on a federal front, many of you may have heard of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA. Revisions are coming. The FTC's been reviewing public comments to the proposed revisions, and areas where we may see some change: methods of verifiable parental consent. The Commission wants to clarify that verifiable parental consent is a requirement for any feature on a website or online service where the operator collects or discloses personal information from the child. So it's not all about bundling everything at the gate. Confidentiality, security, integrity, all of this is sort of at play right now, requiring operators to establish and implement and maintain comprehensive security programs. I mean, we've always said best practices, but this is stronger language that we're seeing. And then we see changes with school and school authorized education purpose, who can grant consent, the parent or a teacher, for instance, data retention and deletion. So COPPA for us is 12 and under. Our age of consent in the US is 13. COPPA 2.0 at the federal level, there's a few regs that are floating. COPPA 2.0 is really about ensuring that 13 through 16-year-olds have to grant consent for the collection of their information. It bans targeted advertising to children and teens. And there's some confusion about what targeted advertising is. Does that mean personalization or tailoring your ads are gone? It may be. The actual knowledge standard, we may see some revisions there. An eraser button and data minimization are topics in COPPA 2.0. On a COSA front, that's the Kids Online Safety Act. We've got over half of our Senate supporting that, and that requires social media platforms to put the well-being of children first before provide them an environment that's safe by default. So that starts to look like what we've seen in Europe. It requires companies to give parental tools so that when minors are using these platforms, it's not about permissioning, it's not parental consent, but rather parental tools to know your kid has an account and to perhaps restrict the disclosure of their data and the times that they may be able to be on. We've just seen something, I think it's called the Report Act that just passed. That's really about telling the social media platforms and that they have to report any harms, sexual harms, trafficking, that kind of thing. They have to report on that now. And then we have our national, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, which we have seen some activity on, and that's aimed to regulate how organizations keep and use consumer data. So that's on a federal level. On the state level, I want to first mention the states that have passed, who have passed or are trying to pass children's code, age-appropriate design codes modeled after the UK's children's code. And that's privacy by design, restricting how tech companies collect and use personal information, and that the products and services have to be age appropriate. So obviously you get into age assurance of some kind when you start to think about building things that are age appropriate. We saw first California is where that came. It was supposed to go into place in July. There was an injunction. I think the state has appealed that. We'll see what happens there. Maryland their governor just signed their children's code. We see it, Vermont, I think we're waiting for a signature, and then we see Minnesota, Nevada, New Mexico coming up behind that. And then other states, have passed laws like Utah, and they got an injunction, but then they came back and revised they repealed what they had first put out and have come back. I think that's going into effect here very quickly. There's Minors Protection in Social Media Act, I believe. It sets default settings again, prioritizing privacy and supervisory tools. That's another area. Verifiable parental consent, and actually maybe it goes into effect like September, October. It's hard to keep track of everything that's happening here. Florida's an interesting one. Florida came out and banned social media accounts for 13 and under, and 14 to 15-year-olds need parental consent. And I believe it says that, and if there's an existing account, a parent can have or request that account be deleted. You've got Arkansas, they passed right after Utah, they got an injunction. We don't see that one coming back right away. I think they're in every 2 years. We'll see what happens. Georgia has the Children's Social Media Act. It kind of mirrors legislation like Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Utah, and others. Ohio has their social media parental notification. I think there's a temporary suspension there. And then we have state age verification laws in Texas and Louisiana, Mississippi, Virginia, right here in my home state. And so I think we've seen about 17 states now pass laws requiring age verification to access online pornography. It's hard to get people to say no to that, but you see a lot of fighting on First Amendment rights and the constitutional rights and the like. I could stop there, but I can't without mentioning New York. We're watching the Stop Addictive Feeds exploitation safe, and that one's kind of interesting because in New York it would say 13 to 17 can certainly have their own social media accounts, but you have to default the feeds to not addictive, and I think no notifications between midnight and 6. And if you want to turn those things on 13 through 17, you'll have to get parental consent. and then Tennessee's another one coming along. So I think I can stop at that. You take that combined with everything that's happening in Europe, and we can say that there's a lot of activity in the children's space globally.
An awful lot. Thank you, Denise. Appreciate that. I think it's also interesting just to mention with Maryland Children's Code, they've removed the express mandate for age estimation, and I think that's one of their moves to try and get the code through without another injunction, another pushback from big tech, which is interesting. Right. And on that subject, Ian, we must come to you. In terms of age assurance, it's, we know from our experience and our work with industry, it's incredibly misunderstood. What is age assurance? Is it age verification? Is it age estimation? When is it required? And of course, it's early days in children's identity online, but age assurance is our first move towards that and understanding and knowing the audience. Maybe you can talk us through a little bit the work that you've been doing at the ICO in terms of what does age assurance mean? What comes under that umbrella term? When is it required?
Absolutely. I'll give it my best go.
Yeah, we haven't got too long though.
I noticed.
They might let us overrun.
I mean, on the most basic level, Katerina's already referred to the Children's Code. The Children's Code includes 15 standards for services in scope to consider and conform with. Standard 3 talks about age-appropriate design, and there's a choice. So organisations can either not do age assurance at all, but what they provide by default is an age-appropriate, kids-safe space. Or they can go the other way, and that's where we're talking about age assurance. And just to specify, when I talk about the ICO's role here, when I talk about the other standards of the code, it's important to clarify, because these things, there's such a large overlap, there's so much kind of conflation of these things. We are not the content regulator for what is online. What we are regulating is the use of children's data in things like recommender systems, things like low privacy settings by default, things like geolocation and tracking, things like the delivering of personalized advertising, the use of nudge techniques. When I'm talking about age appropriate, I'm talking about those kind of things. So what is age assurance? Our opinion refers to age assurance as a variety of approaches that do one of two things. Either they can act as an effective age gate. They can provide a level of assurance appropriate to ensure that children cannot or should not be able to access a particular type of resource. And we can all think of legal examples where that's the case, both online and offline. The other thing is, we talked before about an age-appropriate experience, and it is approaches that are capable of delivering that to a degree of accuracy. So that's where we then get into, well, what kind of techniques are we talking about? Very broadly, our opinion talks about age verification, age estimation. We talk a little about parental controls, and we also talk about self-declaration. And the reason we mention all of those is going back to that first point around age-appropriate design. This is a risk-based consideration. So the level of assurance you need to have needs to be directly related to the risk to the rights of the children who are accessing your platform because of the kind of processing that you are doing. So it's not a single, simple, bright line. Maybe I wish it was, but it isn't. It's about a judgment and determination. So what's verification? Very quickly. In verification, what we're talking about is identifying the exact age of a person or whether they are old enough to have the entitlement to access, normally with reference to some kind of official information with a high degree of trust. So classic examples have been things like photo ID verification, and obviously that's different depending on the national context, where you have things like ID cards. The other thing is access to other information with a high degree of trust, which might be open banking, it could be credit card records. Estimation is slightly different. When we're talking about estimation, we are talking about an identification of maybe an age or an age range, but often using machine learning or algorithmic processes. Everybody always thinks about facial age estimation, and yes, that is a big player in this space. So computer vision kind of scenarios that try and make a judgment based on somebody's appearance. There are others. There's other biometric modalities which are coming onto the market. There's also other routes that look at online behavioral profiling. They also potentially look at other forms of digital footprint, let's say, as ways to try and identify or to profile or suggest that people may be in a particular group or not.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Thank you for being brief. I have several more questions and I'm going to speed through and try to keep to time. But Katerina, I think, looking at what Ian's been saying and understanding how complex these things are, how are you seeing your clients, very briefly, trying to manage the issues and challenges of age assurance, age, estimation, knowing the age of their audience so that they can treat them compliantly? How are they managing in general? What are you seeing from your clients?
Yeah, I would say, well, this is a topic that we could cover like for hours, but I will I will speed up here. I think the important to note is that age assurance is an evolving area. We see varied approaches and different levels of sophistication. Some providers develop their own solutions, but this is more likely to be larger organizations. So it's in practice for many online service providers, going through a third-party age assurance provider is the most feasible and obvious option. Ian already explained the age assurance measures that are currently in the market, and this is pretty much what we're seeing organizations doing. We also see that there are many players who still rely on self-declaration. Again, this is a topic on its own, so I will not go into this further. I think it's important to note that the GDPR does not set a specific method for carrying out age assurance. So, as Ian said, it will be important to consider what is appropriate for each organization depending on how their service is built and what their objectives are by deploying age assurance, and also to assess the risks of their processing activities, to carry out a data protection impact assessment, and to ensure that they have age assurance is one of the measures to protect child users, but they should also think about the wider safeguards that they have in place.
And I think it's up to industry to come up with some of these methods themselves and make sure they map them to the risk and develop them. And I think we've seen the regulator call for that. Ian, coming back to age assurance, I mean, obviously it's absolutely connected with identity, but they are two distinct things. It's very early days in the world of children's identity. I know we've got the EU digital identity regulation that came into force this month. We've seen developments around wallets for adults. Where are we in terms of the sort of level of maturity around children's identity, digital identity?
I think it's early days. I think it is exciting times. Going back to one of the first things Katerina said, what's the kind of legal requirement here? Well, under data protection, the only reference talks about reasonable efforts with regard to the state of technology. Yeah. The state of technology is changing. And while that, at the moment, the priority and the kind of key use cases for uptake are going to be about how adults can prove their age, you can see in time that those kind of sources of high truth in terms of data do exist. And if they can be brought into the world of verifiable credentials, self-sovereign identity, that can start to look quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And Denise, we can't have you not come in at the end here. You've been in the children's identity space for 20 years. Tell us what you're seeing in terms of developments in the US. We are out of time, but I do really want you to give us a quick overview of the US situation in terms of children's identity and the developments you're seeing.
Thank you, Claire. Well, first of all, I would say that COPPA is also a risk-based law. It has always had a sliding scale based on the collection, use, and disclosure of the data, whether it's internal or being shared, is going to drive the level of verifiable in the verifiable parental consent arena. Look, we've always been believers in interoperability, privacy-enhanced credentials. There is no way that parents want to go through this process over and over and over again, turning up their driver's license and passport, reassociating their child, managing all their children, having login credentials for every place their child is so they can manage that. It really screams to an identity use case where we need ways for people to claim their verified credentials and be able to use those in a way that's privacy enhancing for the individual. So I think you're going to see, we certainly operate a single sign-on service that helps once parents are verified, once we allow them to manage with that credential their consent for children on different activities at a very granular level. So I just think we're going to see more of what we all know is coming, which is our information is going to be treated the way our money is. We're going to have to bank that information, verify who we are, associate our loved ones, and manage the collection, use, and disclosure of our data as a family, likely. So I think we're going to see more credentials emerge that will need to interoperate across trust frameworks and the like.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Denise. I'm really sorry to end it because we all love talking about this and we will continue the conversation, I know. We needed a bit longer, but I know we're way over time, so we'll wrap up. Have we got time for questions?
Time for
one question. Any questions?
Yes. Hi, Randy Warshaw. The question I have is, how do you ensure that kids are not broadcasting their data? How do you know that when a request for age verification is coming from a reputable source?
Do you want to have a answer that one?
I can
Ian?
have a go.
Have a go.
I
You
mean,
can pass it round.
I mean, as Katerina just mentioned, in this kind of context, it will either be the service themselves that they have a relationship with, or that request may be coming through a kind of third-party provider.
Yep.
In terms of the kind of UX for that and how that kind of gives people the sufficient kind of confidence and trust. One of the other things that we've looked at is things like the importance of UX design, how you can make these things simple and clear.
Yeah, the
But
transparency point is
absolutely. And obviously what we're talking about here is personal data.
Yeah.
So all the way through this journey, data protection will apply.
Exactly.
So all those considerations, including security, will need to be baked in
Yeah,
to the organisation's
absolutely.
assessment.
And I think really important that kind of we always say the fox not watching the hen house, using neutral third parties to provide that assurance. Denise, is there anything you wanted to jump in on that one? I'm sure you've got something to say.
To throw something in to really crash the scene here. I don't know, 60, 70% of kids have admitted that they fibbed about their age when they first got their social media account. So we already have a tremendous amount of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds that are masquerading around as teenagers, older teens. As these laws come into place to give teens rights, those teens are showing up in systems as 20 plus. But it's not just the kids that are fibbing at the gate. We've got research that says parents are complicit in this area. They are aiding and abetting their children's fake digital IDs. And so an adult can verify all day long that they're an adult and just give their kid an account that would be an adult-oriented account if they really want them to get into services where the age of consent doesn't match, what the household thinks. So this is not about just technology and about laws. It's very complex because it comes down to how people manage their children, their families, and then of course we've got the sort of differences between the U.S. and Europe about who's in charge. I guess that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I guess we don't have any more time. So no, we're up. They're throwing us out. Thank you so much, all of you, but particularly Denise for getting up so early and joining us from her vacation. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you.